Good morning. I think the mics are on. Good morning. Welcome to the press conference for the wonderful Stephen Shore exhibition. My name is Peter Reed. I'm Senior Deputy Director for Curatorial Affairs here at MoMA. And it's my pleasure to be with Stephen Shore and Quentin Bajac this morning. It's a really wonderful day. We've been looking forward to this exhibition, which opens to the public on Sunday, November 19th, and remains on view. It's got a long run until May 28th of next spring, 2018. And the exhibition, as you've probably seen, is up on the third floor in the Robert Menschel Galleries, which have been recently beautifully renovated. And the exhibition, congratulations, I think is absolutely stunningly, beautifully installed. So before we start a conversation with Stephen and Quentin, I do want to thank our sponsors. The exhibition has been made possible by Allianz, a major corporate sponsor who supports initiatives around contemporary art at MoMA, a wonderful partnership between Allianz and MoMA, and we're grateful for that support. And the exhibition also receives support from the William Randolph Hearst Foundation, an endowment fund, and also from the International Council of the Museum of Modern Art, and from David Deckman and Michel Mercure. David is a trustee of the museum. And we also receive support from what's called the Annual Exhibition Fund here at MoMA, which ensures that great exhibitions like this will take place. So, as I said, we have a little time this morning to engage in a conversation with Stephen and Quentin. Quentin Bajac is the Joel and Anne Ehrenkrantz Chief Curator of Photography, who organized this exhibition with the assistance of Kristen Gaylord. Kristen is the Newhall Fellow in the Department of Photography, so congratulations to you. I know you've been working on this a long time. Maybe I could start by asking Quentin a little bit about your interest in this show. You came to MoMA in, I think it was 2013, after a long career in Paris.
Almost 5 years ago.
Almost 5 years ago, and you've done a number of projects at MoMA, but this is in some ways the first very big, major exhibition, certainly the first big monograph you've organized. So why did you pick Stephen Shore?
Why did I pick that guy? The short answer would be that Stephen is 70 this year, but that would be a little short as an explanation. So no, I think that first Stephen has a long history with MoMA, which is important to remember. I think that the fact that he sold some prints at MoMA when he was only 14, to one of my illustrious predecessor, Edward Steichen, who was at that time 83. Is part of his legend as a kind of wonder boy of photography. But it's true that, in fact, there has been a real dialogue between Stephen and the institution and MoMA. Stephen was exhibited in '76, had a solo show when he was in his late 20s. He has known 4 and even 5 chief curators of photography here at MoMA. We have a rather good collection a great collection of Stephen images. So there was that dialogue, that ongoing dialogue, and in a way this exhibition is the continuation of that dialogue. But I would say that maybe more important is that I think that Stephen is one of the most influential American photographers of his generation. I write in the foreword of the catalog that he's one of the most influential and elusive American photographer of his generation. Influential, well, because he was one of the major protagonists of the new color photography in the 70s in America, because he's been teaching at Bard College for now 35 years, training several generations of students. Because he was a major catalyst also in the renewal of interest for documentary photography in the 90s on both sides of the Atlantic, in the US and in Europe. And first and foremost, maybe because he keeps reinventing himself. And I think that I'm fascinated by the way he keeps inventing, and he keeps getting interested and curious in what is happening in photography, what is one of the main interests, and I think that I hope what you can feel in the show is that there's that continuous reinvention, you know, embracing new techniques, experimenting with the different formats, books, slideshows, print-on-demand books, prints, of course, and today Instagram. And this is why his work is completely, I would say, fresh and alive. I wanted to show that, of course, there's that great American work of the 70s that everyone knows, American Places, American Surfaces and Uncommon Places, but there's much more to see. And I wanted to see that, I wanted to show that Steven has experimented before the 70s, in the 60s, but also from the 80s, and that he keeps reinventing himself.
That's great.
You seem to be puzzled by that also.
No, indeed, Quentin, you write about, in this wonderful catalog, I have the copy here. I love your quote. You say Steven has a penchant for reinvention, and I think that is evident in the show and so forth. But maybe talk a little bit about how the two of you worked on this exhibition. And what I'm curious about from Quentin's perspective is, were there surprises, discoveries along the way? And how did you collaborate? Steven, you have a history of making books, and yet we have this beautiful catalog. You have a history of making exhibitions. How did the two of you work? And was that a constructive
well, when I had the show here in '76 that Quentin referred to, the curator was Maria Morris Hamburg, and I was a friend of Sharkowski's, and he was in many ways a mentor for me for many years. And he gave me some advice at the time, which was, when you have a show, you let the curator do their work. And I followed that advice ever since. And when we had a discussion early on, our first discussion, Quentin asked me, how involved do I want to be? And my answer is, I want to help you any way I can, but it's your show. And one thing we, in fact, talked about just this past week as the show was going up was that seeing it reaffirmed for me the wisdom of that decision, because staging exhibitions is not my business. It's not what I have experience in, and I wouldn't have had the imagination to do the show that's upstairs now. I would have done a much more conventional exhibition that didn't, I mean, I think, backtrack a second, I think you talked about a couple of times the sense of reinvention, and the kind of approaches that you show in the exhibition and the way these are staged emphasizes that. And that for me is one of, as I, you know, when one turns 70, one starts thinking of themselves in a bit retrospectively, and I agree that one of the things that's a driving force for me is that I want to keep my mind fresh. And I think that comes across not just in what you show, but in how the exhibition is structured. And again, I wouldn't have thought of it that way. And so that's my part of the lack of
That's great.
collaboration.
That's great. Quentin, can you describe briefly how you did structure the show, and perhaps Steven jump in? And I'm curious, this is interesting to me, what did surprise you? What feels like a fresh or a riskier curatorial move that Quentin took that may have surprised you, or said, oh, I wouldn't have done that, but he did?
One of the things is what's included, and to have the room of the Instagram, the books, and the slideshow to restage a couple of exhibitions, to restage American Surfaces as it was, to even little things like looking at different print sizes.
I think that was important, you know. I had many surprises, when I started working on the show. I think working on the show is always, starting from ideas and then realizing that some are good ones, some are bad ones, and probably also drifting away from your initial, idea and concept when you really start discovering new works. And in fact, that's what we did. We kept discovering new works, new bodies of works, and also some unpublished material. Some good unpublished material in some series that were very well known, Uncommon Places, and also finding some, editorial work of the 70s, the series that you did in Ohio for Fortune magazine, the photo essay that was never published for Geo in Connecticut, etc. These are great series that I didn't expect to find. The stereoscopic images that you showed only once in the mid-70s at Light Galleries. So these were really great surprises, and it's also around these surprises that you structure a show. And then it's true that I knew that you had experimented with the medium, but I didn't expect to find so much of experimentation. And it's true that step by step, the idea of having this kind of reconstruction or galleries that would echo the initial presentation of your work was something that I found was interesting and that necessary. I think that showing American surfaces in that way with the images directly pasted onto the wall, double taped like you did in '72, probably because it was too expensive to frame them and at that time, gives the series less monumentality. Now it's a series that is in the history of photography, that is as becoming a kind of monument, and showing it that way gives back a certain freshness, immediacy, fragility, of course. These are snapshots. These are snapshots taken by a 25-year-old photographer.
But that's why they were originally shown that way, because if they were overmatted, people wouldn't see them as these objects, as snapshots.
And same for All the Meat You Can Eat. I was really surprised I had seen some of the images that had been reproduced in some of your books, but I was surprised to see that you still had all that material in your archives and that we could reconstruct that whole show, which is for me a really important show, because this is when you, in a way, when color enters into your work through the works of others and through also your Mechamatic series. And I thought that was important to restage in a way that show within the exhibition.
That's great. Quentin, you also, the book takes on a different structure, this gorgeous new catalog where the surprise when I opened it is it's an encyclopedia. So you now have an encyclopedia about you. How did you come up with that idea, and why did that feel right for the relationship of the book to the show? Are there any takeaways there, any insights that you wanted to share?
Well, I think that, the book and the shows are two different things. You do not reach the same audience. You can think that the show lasts, 6 months? You can probably think that maybe 1 million visitors will push the doors of that gallery within that period. It is very unlikely that 1 million will buy the catalog and will read it. So you don't address the same public. And Stephen has published wonderful, great, extraordinary books in the last 15 years, especially a lot of books. And I really wanted to do something different. And I think that we wanted, Stephen and I, to stick to the chronology for the exhibition. That was something that we discussed from the start, and because we both believe in chronology, and I think that you need to have that kind of narrative trend within the exhibition. I think that for a book it's really different, especially when you buy the book, you're interested in Stephen's work, you know a little about Stevens, you want to know more. And I think that having that kind of reference book, that model of the encyclopedia, which is a kind of how to structure a knowledge, is something very different from what you've done in the past with the others, with your other books. And that was also a way to mix some series and to show the parallels and some correspondence between, what you did in the US in the 70s and what you did in Ukraine 4 to 5 years ago, because we see the same interests, the same obsessions. I could say, food, cars, roadsides, shop windows, and I was also interested in having that reading of your work.
I'm curious, when I was reading through the book and about some of the way your work has been characterized, Stephen, over the years as detached or a kind of deadpan quality and so forth. When you look at the work today, and when we look at the work today, made maybe it's 40 years ago, 30 years ago, is that the right lens to look through it at? It's particularly a series such as Ohio or Uncommon Places and so forth. Is that a sort of inappropriate reading, maybe? How would you respond to that writing about your work as utterly detached?
I think it depends on the body of work. One of the ones you just mentioned, the work that I did in Ohio and Pennsylvania for Fortune magazine was in certain ways the most political work I did in the 70s, anyway, because it's dealing with people whose steel mills were closing. And to put it into some historical context, this was 15 years before NAFTA. This was not because of trade, this was because they hadn't modernized and couldn't compete with Japan. And they never reopened. And we're seeing some of the repercussions of that today. But even then, it was a charged situation. But let me answer your question in a different way. I'm not sure I really thought of my work as being deadpan. I would say two things. One is I saw cultural phenomena as being too complex to be more simply politicized. That I remember once giving a lecture at the University of Arizona, and someone wanted to get me to say that my pictures were critical of American culture because there was a gas station. And I just thought how ironic that we're in a city which at the time did not have much public transportation. All of you drove cars to get here. Gas stations are not a priori bad things. So I was thinking about the complexity of a culture. But the other thing is that one of my interests over many years, over decades, has been communicating the experience of seeing the world with concentrated attention. To see the world, those moments I think everyone has when things are quiet in them and the experience of the world is more vivid. And often less dramatic moments lend themselves to that communication. Because a dramatic moment, you get caught up in the moment. And to look at just literally what's in front of you and pay attention to it at any given time, I found interesting. And that, I started with American Surfaces with that, and where I would simply pay attention to my field of vision at random times during the day. What am I looking at? What is the experience like? And wanted to use that as the basis of that communication.
Is that the underlying sort of premise or ethos of your teaching as well? At Bard, is that an exercise in thinking, looking,
absolutely,
contemplation?
Bard is a liberal arts college. This is not a fine arts program, and so I'm not teaching people who are just intending to be artists. And I think seeing with attention is something that attention and self-awareness is something that would be useful to anyone.
That's a wonderful thought. Can we fast forward that thinking towards your Instagram project? How is it playing out in Instagram, and are there is it working for you, against this, or how should we be starting to receive the feeds? I subscribed this morning, by the way.
Okay. Well, let me answer that by just recounting my wife's experience with Instagram. She is a very visual person. She had been a picture editor at Time Life Books and then at Fortune magazine. In fact, had Walker Evans' old office at Fortune. But she never was a photographer. And when we both got interested in Instagram, I saw that it changed her relationship to the world, that she began to consume it in a more detached visual way, because she started savoring things and thinking, is this something I want to post? And so now, as she went through the day, she would, with a kind of detachment, pay attention to what she was seeing. So I think it can heighten it. But Instagram is used in so many ways by so many different people. You know, craftspeople sell their pottery on it. There are other people who just take selfies. There's 700 million monthly followers, not followers, monthly users, and so it's hard to characterize how it's used. But I think it has the potential for heightening awareness.
And you're also especially interested in the fact that you can, exchange ideas with people. I
Yes.
think that part of the interest of
Yes,
Instagram is
and
it not only lies in the images, but also on the
Well,
discussion that these images.
Yes, and there are some people who are coming tonight who are people that I follow on Instagram, and one person who's coming to the dinner tonight is an architect from Geneva, who I saw started following me, and then I saw his work, and not his photography, his architecture, and asked him if he wanted to design our house in Montana and trade for a photograph, and he said absolutely, and a month later flew in one day from Geneva to Bozeman, Montana, and we become friends. I saw him in Arles when I saw you there 2 years ago, and he's coming over for the opening. And this is just someone I met on Instagram, and it was a wonderful person.
Terrific. That's a great story. So subscribe. Maybe this is a good moment to see if there are questions from the audience. We are being live streamed, so if you would raise your hand and wait for the microphone so everyone can hear you, that would be great. But we'd love to hear from you and questions for Stephen or Quentin. It's hard for me to see, but any comments, questions? There's one. Thank you.
I was wondering about that. It's like almost like a performance where you were outside the opera and you handed out those get rich quick flyers. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, do you have a question? Do you have a question about it?
Well, I guess like where it fits into your.
I'm not sure where it fits in.
What was the event?
I produced a handbill that wasn't advertising anything. It was just to have a handbill, and I gave it out around the city. And one night, knowing it was the opening night of the opera, went to Lincoln Center, and gave one to John Lindsay as he was getting into his limo. And then about a week later, I got a call from the Securities and Exchange Commission, because the return address was the Cosmic Wealth Recirculation and Growth Fund, a pun on the word growth fund. And they thought that I was running some kind of business that they hadn't approved of. and said, well, what's your business? And I said, there's no business. I just give out the handbills. And they said, well, what if we responded? What if someone wrote? And I said, you would get my next handbill. And they said, what was that? What does it say? And I said, it's called the Daily Word, which is, if you saw it upstairs, it's 31 words for the month of October. And I started reading, and after I got to about the sixth word, they got the picture and stopped me before I went on and read all 31 and said, "Oh, thank you," and realized they had some kind of nut on the other end of the line.
Slightly subversive. Is it a little bit like the postcard project too, where you infiltrated in a certain way, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And there seems to be a pleasure in just
Well, that actually
getting the
happened by
images out.
accident. I was convinced that the New York art world would love postcards of Amarillo, Texas, and there was a bookstore on Madison Avenue called Wittenborn, which was the best art bookstore, one of the two best art bookstores in the city at the time, and this is where you would go if you wanted to buy Ed Ruscha books. And they agreed to put up a postcard rack with my postcards in it. And I went to the largest printer of postcards in America, Dexter Press, and had 56,000 cards printed, thinking these were going to be very hot items. And they didn't sell any. And so I was stuck with all these cards and had to think what to do. And so that's how I started distributing them all over the country. It was just to get rid of them. It would be a shame to just dump them in the trash.
Other questions? Yes, down here in front, maybe up there. Meg, as you like, Meg. Thank you.
Thanks. I couldn't help but notice in terms of the places that you photographed that you did a lot of driving.
Yes.
And I couldn't help but notice the collection of cameras at the end of the show. So I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about the cars you were driving while you were doing these
Well, I was
trips.
living in Manhattan and didn't own a car, and so I would just rent a car, and the car I was driving was just, for some reason they were typically were Plymouths, and they typically were green, but that was just what I was given. And for all the different cameras that are in the show, throughout most of that period, I used one camera, which is an 8x10 view camera.
And now when you're in Ukraine or in Israel, do you still drive yourself? Or do you have a driver?
I have a driver.
No.
The stereo images, the 3D images, I think were just fantastic, devastating. Have you done any more work in that medium, or are you interested in?
Where are you? I can't see.
Right here.
Oh, I see. Okay. I haven't. It was just for about a 1 month period. Yeah, in '74. But as Quentin mentioned, they were shown at Light Gallery at the time, but I hadn't really looked at them since. And for me, that was one of the surprises of the show.
Another question? Yes. Barbara.
Hi.
Yeah.
I teach photography, and a lot of my students are making Stephen Shores. And it's very hard when I'm critiquing their work to talk to them about things like originality, because they argue that they're making good photos because they look just like yours. So how do you define what makes a Stephen Shore unique?
I'm going to answer that in sort of a different way, which is, or maybe answer a slightly different question, which is that the photographs that I most admire, and I suspect that most of your students really admire, are pictures where the artist is not trying to make good pictures. They have visual problems that they want to solve. And that it doesn't mean they're not cognizant of what's gone before in photography, in painting, and all other media, but they have certain problems that they want to solve, and they pursue it. And the results sometimes are what people or a culture might think of as good pictures. but the good pictures are a byproduct. It's not the motive. And so when a student copies someone because they want to make good pictures, they're getting the cart before the horse.
There's that wonderful section in the exhibition about halfway through the exhibition. There's a sort of pause space of, is it called seeing photographs or seeing?
The nature of photographs.
The nature of photographs, a way of looking at the photographs. And you're invited to put on headphones, and I heard Kristen's voice, as a way of guiding one to look at a photograph if you're not the maker, not a photographer and trained that way. It was a wonderful experience, a way of guided looking, and I'm wondering if it's almost in response to that question, you might say, that room seems to respond to that question of what's special about this or what's original, and it's much harder than you think, right?
Well, I was very glad that you decided to include that in the show because, as you've alluded to, I think of teaching as much part of my career as photographing.
And as you know, it's not always easy to display what teaching is about.
Yes.
So I thought that really we needed a pose in the exhibition at that moment precisely, because also that corresponds, I think, to a pose in your work
Yes.
after In Common Places, before, in a way, beginning the landscapes, moving to Montana, getting married, starting teaching, etc. And so that was the good moment in the narrative, and that was a way also to show your reading of images, and also the way through with which, through nature photographs, you try to, in a way, define your own family. People that influence you, people that are of your generation and that you looked at, and also people that you influence. This is why also Thomas Truth is here, included in that selection.
Do we have time for one more question, perhaps? Yes, in the back.
Hi, terrific show, by the way, so thank you. This is a little bit more of a, I guess, I don't know, an opinion question, or I guess I want to circle back towards, the condition of photography today, the use of Instagram. Do you feel like there's something that has changed? I mean, I know you're enthusiastic about Instagram, as you well should be, but do you feel like there's a way that photography has evolved, and that it has to do something different today than it did when you were doing American Surfaces or the work in the 70s? I mean, how do you see that sort of shift in broader sort of terms?
What you're asking raises a number of different issues that kind of bounce off each other. One thing is, because of technological changes, inevitable changes, everyone has a camera on them all the time. And so I remember, and I think everyone of a certain age remembers seeing something and think, oh, I wish I had my camera. Well, no one ever thinks that anymore. It means everyone is taking pictures. But I don't think that fact diminishes the work of artists taking pictures. Everyone writes, and that some people write grocery lists and other people write legal briefs doesn't diminish what a novelist does. The other thought is that we write. I think we are hardwired to understand grammar. And I saw my son when he was really tiny, working on grammar on his own, and working on plurals and past tense. And you can't teach someone past tense. You can point and say bottle, and he can say bottle, but how do you how do you teach an 18-month-old or a 2-year-old what a past tense is? But they work on that. So there's this built-in, I believe, genetic understanding of grammar. And then we're schooled in language. All this is to say, photography is the easiest medium to produce work in, and we're not schooled in it. So there's a lot of work being done that is, to my eyes, visually illiterate. And I don't mean in terms of fussy rules of composition. I mean again, to use grammar as an analogy, if you separate rules of grammar from laws of grammar, the relation of a subject to a predicate is a law of grammar. To say that a sentence can't end in a preposition is a rule. It's just a convention. It doesn't mean anything, and it's something that Shakespeare never followed. And so, when I'm talking about visual literacy, I'm talking about kind of the laws of how the world that flows in time is translated into a flat, static photograph, and not what makes a good composition. And so, so in this world we live in, where everyone is taking pictures all the time and posting them, and has a voice, there still can be carved out space for people who do it in a deeper way.
That is probably a superb point at which to conclude. That was very thoughtful. Thank you. Stephen, thank you for taking time to participate this morning.
Glad to.
Quentin, thank you, and congratulations to both of you on this superb exhibition.
Well, I'll say that one drawback of having someone up here who is a professional teacher is that their answers tend to be long.
No, that's great. It's I wish we had another hour, or that we had a class with you, because what was going through my mind as you were speaking was the pleasure of visiting and revisiting the exhibition. There's a lot to look at, and the pleasure of reading and rereading the beautiful new catalog, because it is it's anything but ordinary, and I think that's what was, back to my question about, is this just sort of flat-footed, or it's not, obviously, but it's poetic in its own ways and thoughtful. And that's going to be my pleasure of doing this. So I do want to thank all of you for coming today. Thank you for your interest in the show, and this wonderful show at MoMA. It's going to stay on view through May 28th. So please come back. Hope to see you in the galleries. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Before we go,